A scribe sits in a cold stone room in the ancient Near East. The heavy parchment unrolled across his lap under the light of a flickering olive oil lamp. Giants in the earth. Mighty men of old. Men of renown. Most people read these 4 verses today, and they either skip them entirely, and to understand why the biblical writers keep bringing the giants back, you have to look at what the author of Genesis was actually doing with his pen. When archaeologists brush the sand off the ruined clay tablets of Nineveh, they find the ancient world's obsession with the divine human hybrid. The kings of Assyria and Babylon chiseled their faces into massive limestone monuments, boasting that their bloodline was mixed with the gods. They claimed this mixed blood gave them the divine right to conquer, to crush, to take whichever women they wanted, and to build towering cities on the backs of slaves. To the ancient pagan mind, the giant was the pinnacle of human evolution. The biblical text looks at this exact same cultural monument and takes a sledgehammer to it. The writer of Genesis is doing something profoundly subversive. He is taking the heroes of the surrounding nations, the celebrated ancestors of the empires that would eventually enslave Israel, and turning them into the villains of the biblical narrative. Genesis is not a mythological compromise. It is a theological teardown. When the biblical writers constantly position the Israelites against the Nephilim, the Anakim, or giants like Goliath, they are not just recounting ancient military history, they are describing a clash of cosmic proportions, or they obsess over them to the point of madness. They assume this is just a bizarre mythological fragment that somehow survived the final editing of Genesis. The giants represent the ultimate expression of human rebellion. They are what happens when humanity tries to seize the power of heaven to build an empire of flesh. They are the walking, breathing embodiment of the serpent's promise in the garden, the lie that human beings can seize divine status by force. This is why the biblical text strips them of their glory. It does not call them sages. It calls them the fallen ones. It does not praise their iron swords or their hidden knowledge. It says their presence filled the earth with violence, soaking the soil in blood until the only remedy left was a floodwater reset. The polemic is brilliantly devastating. The very beings that the Babylonian empires worshipped as the architects of civilization, the Hebrew text exposes as the architects of our destruction. We tend to reduce the story of human corruption to a single moment in a garden. We think the fracture between heaven and earth was a one-time event involving a tree and a piece of fruit. But the ancient Jewish mind understood that the fracture went much deeper. The rebellion was not a quiet moment of theft. It was a violent, coordinated invasion. The watchers stand on the rocky ridge. The cold wind howls across the peak. They look down at the valleys, at the tents, at the daughters of men. A strange, supernatural sideshow about fallen angels and towering monsters that belongs in a fantasy epic. Not a sacred text. They do not ask. They take. The spiritual realm violently crashes into the physical dirt. Flesh meets spirit. The boundary shatters. The blood mixes. The Nephilim are born. They are not just tall men. They are apex predators. They consume the resources of the land. They consume the livestock. They turn on humanity itself. The ancient Jewish traditions surrounding this moment describe the giants beginning to devour mankind. The violence spreads like a wildfire. You can hear the heavy thud of massive footsteps in the dust. You can hear the hammer striking the anvil as iron swords are forged for the first time. The air smells of burning roots, crushed metal, and blood. In the 4th chapter of Genesis, the blood of one man, Abel, cries out from the soil. By the 6th chapter, the entire earth is screaming. The text says all flesh had corrupted its way. All of it. This is not a quiet theft of fruit in a secluded garden. It is a military occupation. The ancient Jewish worldview did not see the fall of humanity as a single event. They saw it as a sequence of tragic fractures. The garden was the first fracture. The rebellion of the spiritual beings was the second. The Tower of Babel would be the third. Or, conversely, they try to sanitize it. They assume it is just a polite, ancient metaphor for good. Religious people marrying bad. irreligious people. Genesis 6 is the moment the corruption mutates. The serpent in Eden offered divinity through a piece of fruit. The mutineers in Genesis 6 offered divinity through mixed blood and iron. The rebellion in Eden was not the end of the fall. It was the prologue. The Nephilim are the terrifying escalation. They are the physical evidence that humanity has chosen the chaos of the serpent over the order of God. They are empires built on broken bones. They are the human desire for total dominance, weaponized and made flesh. God looks down. The grief in the divine heart is absolute. He breaks open the fountains of the deep. The waters rise. The heavy rain beats down on the pitch-covered roof of the ark for 40 days. The towering cities sink. The iron swords rust in the deep. The physical giants are washed from the earth. The mud finally dries under a new sun. Noah steps out. He builds an altar. But the floodwaters could not wash away the underlying disease, because the Nephilim did not just leave massive bones buried in the ancient dirt. They left a phantom blueprint in the human heart. The bones of the Anakim are buried beneath 3,000 years of desert sand. The physical giants are gone. But if you look closer at the ancient language, at the cultural landscape, breathing just outside the text, you start to see something. The bronze armor has rusted into dust, and the heavy iron beds of the ancient kings have long since disintegrated. But the impulse of Genesis 6 did not drown in the floodwaters. The desire to cross the boundary, to become our own gods, to build towers that scrape the sky, and empires that consume the weak that desire survive the water. The disease simply adapted to a new environment. We no longer forge heavy bronze swords in the desert heat. We forge algorithms in sterile server rooms, humming with chilled air. We build corporate monoliths of glass and steel that cast long, freezing shadows over crowded city streets. We do not worship winged sages rising from the Euphrates, but we worship the exact same promise they offered. The promise that technology, power, and absolute autonomy will finally make us divine. The Nephilim are not a mythological curiosity. They are the terrifying reflection of a humanity that has decided to govern itself. The biblical text calls these ancient beings Anshe Hashem, men of the name, men of renown. Their defining characteristic was the ruthless drive to carve their own names into the earth, to demand reverence, to ensure their legacy would never be erased. We do not use cuneiform tablets to record our greatness anymore. The supernatural obsession and the safe sanitation both completely miss. These verses are not a random footnote. They are a surgical strike. We use digital ledgers, glowing screens, and marble monuments. We curate our images in the digital ether, desperate for the exact same renown. We want the power of the gods, but we entirely reject submission to the Creator. We read this ancient passage, and we look for literal monsters with 6 fingers and 6 toes. We stare at the shadows of the ancient world, completely blind to the fact that we have built an entire modern civilization running on the exact same operating system. The ghost of the giant is in the room whenever a system extracts life from the vulnerable to elevate the powerful. The giant is the political machinery that speaks of peace while quietly authorizing the destruction of a dusty neighborhood on the other side of the world for the sake of resources. The giant is the subtle, quiet voice in our own minds that whispers that we are the center of the universe, and everyone else is just a stepping stone in our rise to the top. Whenever human beings decide that limits do not apply to them, they are resurrecting the mutiny of the Watchers. We are still trying to drag heaven down to earth by force. We are still trying to mix the divine spark with our own broken ambition. The question isn't just who the giants were. It is what their presence actually means. We treat Genesis 6 like a theological puzzle, and the result is always the same, a world filled with violence. But the story of Scripture does not end with the giants winning. The biblical narrative refuses to let the towering power of human empire have the final word. Because from the moment the floodwaters recede, the text begins setting up a completely different kind of king, operating on a completely different kind of power. And to see how God finally breaks the blueprint of the Nephilim, you have to look at the rhythm of the entire story. The Watchers crossed the boundary to take whatever they wanted, and the floodwaters rose to wash them away. The Anakim towered over the entrance to the Promised Land, and a traumatized generation wept in the sand. A giant named Goliath wore 100 pounds of bronze into a valley, and a shepherd boy brought him down with a single stone. The pagan kings chiseled their divine titles into limestone monuments, and their empires crumbled into forgotten ash. The builders of Babylon stacked bricks to scrape the heavens, and their voices were scattered into the wind. The modern world forged a digital empire to achieve total autonomy, and human hearts were left more isolated than ever. To be solved on a whiteboard. We want to categorize the DNA of giants and map out angelic hierarchies. The true Son of God stepped down not to seize power, but to surrender his own breath on a Roman cross. And the terrifying blueprint of the Nephilim was broken forever. One thread, one story, but maybe the part that stays with me most is the root word itself, naphil, to fall, or to cause others to fall. We spend our lives convinced that greatness means towering over everyone else. We want to be men and women of renown. We want to build empires in our careers, in our neighborhoods, in our digital profiles. We think that by seizing control, we are rising. But the ancient text is quietly holding up a mirror. Every time we cross a boundary to elevate ourselves at the expense of the vulnerable, we do not rise. We fall. The very things we think will make us like God are the things that drag our humanity into the dirt. If you are in a season where you feel entirely insignificant, where the giants in your life, whether they are crushing debts, corporate machines, or the overwhelming weight of modern anxiety, are making you feel like a grasshopper in your own eyes, sit in the quiet truth of this ancient polemic. The kingdom of God is not an empire of giants. It is an inheritance for the dust. But the writer of Genesis was not offering a puzzle. He was diagnosing something. He was naming a terminal disease. The true king did not arrive in heavy armor. He did not break down doors or take by force. He washed feet. He let his body be broken by an empire that thought it was divine. He subverted the entire ancient definition of what it means to be powerful. You do not need to be a giant to survive this world. You just need to be held by the one who conquered it. And may the God who watches empires rise and fall like ash, who brought down the ancient warlords with a flood and a stone, to give you the profound courage to stop building a towering name for yourself and finally rest in the reality that you are deeply known. If this reached something in you today, subscribe. Leave a comment. Even one word helps. Share this with someone who is facing a massive giant of their own right now and needs to remember how the story actually ends. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts that infects the human condition to this day, a disease of boundaries crossed, of power taken by force, of humanity. He traces the dark ink with his finger, reading aloud the opening chapters of the world, trying to drag heaven down into the dirt to build its own empire. The Nephilim are not a mythological cameo. They are the climax of an ancient rebellion. To feel the weight of what is actually happening right before, the floodwaters break open the sky and wash the world clean. You cannot just read the English translation. You have to step into the 3,000-year argument about who these beings actually were, because the debate itself is hiding the very key to the passage. For 3,000 years, rabbis and theologians have stared at the parchment. They trace the heavy ink. They argue in the margins. The debate over these 4 verses usually fractures into 3 distinct camps. The first camp is the safe reading. The Sethite view: the sons of God are the righteous line of Seth. The daughters of men are the wicked line of Cain. Good religious men marry pagan women. The holy bloodline fractures. The resulting giants are simply tall, powerful men. The theology remains clean. The boundaries remain intact. Heaven stays in heaven. Earth stays on earth. The second camp is the political reading, the tyrant view. The sons of God are human kings, ancient despots holding iron swords. In the ancient Near East, rulers routinely claimed divine titles. They called themselves sons of the gods. He reads about a garden and a serpent. He reads about a brother bleeding out in an open field. the soil crying out. They built massive harems. They broke down doors. They took whichever women they wanted. The giants are just aristocratic warlords. The sin is human tyranny. The story is about political oppression. The third camp is the oldest reading. It is also the most terrifying. It is the supernatural view. It is the view held by the ancient Jewish sages reading scrolls in the desert. It is the view preserved in the book of Enoch. It is the view explicitly referenced by the New Testament writers Peter and Jude. The sons of God are spiritual beings. They are members of the divine council. They look down from the spiritual realm. They step across the boundary of creation. They take human women by force, and the union produces something unnatural. The Nephilim, a hybrid race. 3 theories. 3 ways to read the text. Modern minds instinctively grab the first 2. We want logic. We want natural explanations. We want to avoid the uncomfortable weirdness of ancient cosmology. But the original audience of Genesis did not share our modern discomfort. When an ancient Israelite heard this story around a fire in the wilderness, their mind did not jump to the bloodline of Seth. They did not just picture greedy human kings. This passage is not a polite moral fable about marriage. It is a deliberate act of literary warfare. He reads through the 5th chapter of Genesis, a long, rhythmic genealogy of men who lived for centuries. To see the target of that war, you have to look outside the pages of the Bible. You have to look at the stories the rest of the ancient world was telling. Because right across the border, in the shadow of massive stone ziggurats, the Babylonians were telling a very similar story. They had their own account of the days before the Great Flood. They had their own divine beings coming down from the heavens to interact with humanity. And they had a very specific name for them. A Babylonian scribe presses the wedge-shaped edge of a reed stylus into a tablet of wet clay. The mud is cool, pulled fresh from the banks of the Euphrates River. He breathes in the dust of the city, and he begins to record the glory of his ancestors. He is writing the story of the Apkallu. In the ancient Near East, the Apkallu are the ultimate heroes. If you walk into the massive stone palaces of Assyria or Babylon, you will see them carved deep into the limestone walls, towering figures with the wings of eagles or the cloaks of fish. The Babylonian texts say that, before the Great Flood, the gods sent these 7 divine sages down to earth. The rhythm of that chapter is predictable, almost like a drumbeat. A man lives. He has sons and daughters. And then the inevitable refrain hits. Their mission was to interact with human kings and share the hidden secrets of the spiritual realm. According to the surrounding cultures, these divine beings taught men how to forge heavy iron swords and craft armor. They taught women how to paint their eyelids and cut roots for sorcery. They brought astrology, mathematics, and empire building. The pagan kings proudly boasted that their own bloodlines were mixed with the DNA of these divine beings. To the ancient pagan mind, the crossing of the boundary between heaven and earth was the greatest thing that ever happened to humanity. It was the spark of human civilization. Then comes the writer of Genesis. The Israelite narrator takes this deeply embedded cultural narrative and completely rewrites the verdict. The text agrees that spiritual beings stepped down before the flood. It agrees that they interacted with humanity, but it paints the interaction as an unmitigated cosmic catastrophe. Genesis is not copying a Babylonian legend. It is launching a theological missile. What Babylon celebrates as divine enlightenment, Genesis diagnoses as high treason. The secret knowledge did not elevate humanity, it weaponized it. The biblical text says that because of this union, the earth was filled with violence. The boundary between the human and the divine was not meant to be blurred, because humanity was not ready to wield the fire of heaven. And he died, and he died, and he died. It is a steady, somber cadence. The divine beings were not saviors bringing light to a dark world. They were mutineers. To make this absolutely clear, the writer of Genesis does not use the Babylonian titles. He refuses to call them sages or heroes. Instead, he reaches into the Hebrew language and selects 2 highly specific, almost scandalous terms to describe exactly who these beings were and what their terrifying children became. And to see the insult, you have to look at the original alphabet. Genesis chapter 6, verses 2 and 4. The parchment is unrolled, the heavy black ink stark against the animal's skin. The text describes a rebellion that breaks the world, and it identifies the mutineers with a highly specific title. The phrase your English Bible translates as "sons of God" is the Hebrew Bene Elohim. It is a term used in the Old Testament, not for righteous human beings, but for the spiritual members of God's divine council. It is the exact same phrase used in the book of Job. Chapter 38. When the angels shout for joy at the dawn of creation, but the word used for their terrifying offspring is the true shock. The text says, the union produced giants in the earth. The Hebrew word is Nephilim, and its root is the verb naphal. And then, 4 verses in the 6th chapter shatter the pattern entirely. The text suddenly introduces the sons of God. To fall, to drop, to be cast down into the dirt. Naphal is not a word of elevation. It appears over 400 times in the Old Testament, and it almost always carries the weight of a sudden, violent descent. It is the sound of a body hitting the floor when a sword strikes. It is the collapse of a canvas tent when the pegs are violently pulled. It is the descent of a royal crown slipping into the mud. If this kind of textual archaeology is stirring up questions you've never considered, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So the translation shifts beneath our feet. Nephilim does not simply mean a biological giant. It means the fallen ones. Or, more accurately, in the Hebrew grammar, it can mean the ones who cause others to fall. That root changes everything. It completely subverts the Babylonian myth. The pagan cultures called these beings heroes. The pagan kings claimed they elevated humanity to the stars, handing them the fire of civilization. The Hebrew text looks at the exact same narrative and uses a word that means a violent, catastrophic collapse. The Nephilim were not a genetic upgrade. They were a spiritual infection. They were not the builders of a glorious human empire. They were the architects of our degradation. It says they looked down and saw the daughters of men. It says they left their proper dwelling and took whichever women they chose. By force. They were the physical embodiment of heaven being dragged down by force and twisted into something horrific. They represent the terrifying moment humanity traded divine order for demonic chaos. And the tragedy is that the flood waters did not wash the chaos away completely. Because if you keep turning the pages of the scroll, past the receding waters and the altar of Noah, past the rainbow cutting through the clouds, the fallen ones return. 12 men walk into the heat of Canaan. The dust coats their sandals. The sun burns their shoulders. They are a scouting party. They carry a knife. They cut a single branch of grapes in the valley of Eshcol. The fruit is so heavy, the wooden pole bends between 2 men. They look at the land. The land is good. They look at the cities. The walls scrape the sky. They look at the inhabitants. The blood drains from their faces. They walk back into the Israelite camp. They drop the fruit in the dirt. They deliver a report that shatters the courage of an entire nation in a matter of seconds. They do not just report fortified walls. They report a nightmare. We saw the Nephilim there. They whisper in Numbers chapter 13. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. And then, the parchment drops, a word that has haunted theologians, translators, and historians for 3 millennia. The Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes. And we looked the same to them. Fear operates like a virus. It moves from tent to tent. The sound of weeping tears through the camp in the dark. Caleb tries to silence the crowd. Joshua tears his clothes. The people pick up stones. You can hear the rocks hitting the dry earth. Most readers assume the spies are simply exaggerating. We think they are terrified of tall enemy soldiers. We assume it is just hyperbole born from human cowardice. But the panic in the camp goes deeper than a height disadvantage. The terror is not military. It is mythological. When they whisper the word Nephilim, they are invoking the darkest chapter of ancient history. They are looking at the Anakim, a literal tribe of abnormally massive warriors, and mapping the ancient trauma of Genesis 6 directly onto them, whether the Anakim literally carry the bloodline of the pre-flood mutineers, or whether the traumatized spies are projecting a cosmic dread onto a terrifying human enemy. The impact is identical. The ghosts of the fallen ones are blocking the door to the promised land. This dread does not disappear. It haunts them for generations. A king named Og sleeps on an iron bed 13 feet long. A champion named Goliath steps into a valley wearing bronze scale armor, weighing 120 pounds. The Israelites keep facing these towering anomalies. This is not a random collection of tall tales. It is a sustained theological war.